Hello and welcome to, or welcome back to, P10C Talk, the show where we talk about the CZ P10C and P10C accessories. I'm your host, Jason, and tonight's episode is going to be about this holster that I basically stole from my friend Corey. Before we get into that, though, there's a couple items of housekeeping that must be addressed. First and foremost, happy birthday to my beloved Core. For the last 248 years, this earth has been protected by the finest fighting force ever conceived by men, the United States Marine Corps. I have being counted among their number is one of my greatest honors, and I have nothing but reverence for the men and women who are currently serving, as well as the ones who have gone before me and the ones who will come inevitably after. Now, I know that there might be some of you out there who take some exception to what I just claimed was the finest fighting force ever conceived by mankind, and I expect and invite any inter-service rivalry in the comments below. But know this: tomorrow is Veterans Day. Today is the observed holiday. Tomorrow is the actual holiday. I'm absolutely indebted to all veterans of all services and their willingness to put themselves between what they perceive as harm and their fellow countrymen, regardless of what country you might come from, allied or otherwise. So we veterans are a special breed of people. Maybe the window licking kind of special, sure, but special nonetheless. Now, please, thank you for your service. And again, if you want to try and explain how your service matters as much as my service, please use the comments for that. I look forward to it, and I invite it. I adore it, quite frankly. A special shout out to the people of the 1st Light Armor Reconnaissance Battalion Association, who, through their hard work, have managed to... it's been a couple years now, but it's still worth noting. They've managed to build a memorial to the fallen of our unit in its short but really active history. It's very important work that they've done, and they're doing more work for the people who currently serve in that unit as well. But the monument that they built to our fallen is especially important to those of us who served with them, and I can't thank them enough. So huge shout out to the 1st LAR Bn Association. If you want to know what they're doing now, or you want to contribute to whatever to their ongoing purpose, whatever their current agenda is, you can find that on their website. I'll link it in the description below. Any proceeds that they receive will be used directly to help Marines in service, and I appreciate that from you if you provide it. If you don't, at least check out the website, check out the monument to the 1st LAR Battalion's fallen over every iteration of that unit since its inception in the 80s to now. It's a really fantastic piece of work. I'll include a picture here before we go any further. The second bit of housekeeping is that this is probably going to be the second episode of P10C Talk that actually sees the internet. I have a couple in progress, some of them in final stages of editing, some of them in rewrite, but they're ongoing. This will likely be the second one, which is kind of funny because the first episode of the series was about the configuration of 2 of my competition firearms, of which this is one. We call this Old Faithful, but also the new Hotness. And I went through them and I cataloged all the configuration changes, all the parts that I used, gave you an idea of how much it costs to rebuild them. If you haven't seen that episode, I encourage you to go do that now, or soon anyway. And at the end of that, or in the middle, I don't remember where, somewhere in there, I had intimated that I would go through each one of these in further episodes, go through each one of these configuration changes and sort of evaluate them or review them based on their value, perceived or otherwise. And in none of the talk was a holster a part of that. So the fact that this is going to be the second episode in the series is kind of funny to me. Maybe not to you. If you don't like it, I apologize. But it is what it is. That said, future episodes are going to drop hopefully soon. They're going to be more meaningful to the configuration changes of the P-10C, and I would hate for you to miss that if that's your kind of thing. I love talking about firearms. I love talking about the P-10C. I love talking about them in the comments. So it'd make it easier on me if you could just like this video, subscribe to my channel, and that way when new episodes drop, I don't have to, I've only got a few followers, and it's hard for us to like cover the whole planet. It's going to be easier for you to just receive a notification of a new episode than me, my other members of the channel, or my mom to find you and let you know that a new episode is here. So like and subscribe if that's your thing. If it's not your thing, do it for me then, right? I appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, all that out of the way, this is a holster from a company called Werkz, W-E-R-K-Z, and as best I can tell, it's no longer offered in this configuration. This is their M7 holster for P-10C or P-10F with a TLR7 attached to it. And I can't find that on their website anymore. The old link I had, 404s, if I tried going through the configurator, I get nowhere near this configuration. So the best I think they have right now for P-10C is with an O-light, and I almost kind of hate saying it because I don't know if they're intending to bring this back or not. I'm going to try and reach out to them and get some answers on that. I'll update the comments in the future. I'll put a video short out about that particular response. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about this holster in pros and cons, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and hopefully we can extract that into the greater conversation of what makes a decent competition holster or range use holster. Okay, so first things first, it's a black Kydex single layer holster. It's plenty sturdy for a light firearm like this. I think if I had a full steel firearm, a double layer holster gives a certain amount of rigidity that I kind of appreciate. That said, there's, to each their own on that. When this shipped with a default Cant, rearward Cant, and when I say rearward, I mean muzzle rear Cant of about 5 degrees, I think, ish, right? And I hate that. Corey didn't like it either. In IDPA, you can have a rearward Cant of the muzzle. You cannot have a forward Cant of the muzzle, but you can have a rearward one. But generally speaking, we all prefer straight drop holsters in IDPA. Most of us do. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. In order to address that, to correct the Cant, we relied on the Blade Tech Tek-Mount system. This was cut for a Blade Tech pattern, which is that pattern that you sort of see up here on this disc. You can kind of see it back here with where the screw placement is. But we put this disc on because one of the features of the Blade Tech Tek-Mount quick attachment system is that you can rotate this in 10-degree increments. Now, you'll notice a problem with a 5-degree Cant and 10-degree increments of rotation. But before we get too crazy about it, let me show you how this works. So these teeth here interact with these teeth on this paddle. It's connected to this paddle right here. And this paddle is what allows you to secure the male attachment to the female attachment. And then this little, whatever, lever, I guess, locks the panel in place so you can't make adjustments. So this has to be either forward or backward to be locked and in the neutral position for in order to mate the two together or to rotate it. So this is how it works. So you get it put on the system like that, you pull up the paddle, and then you can rotate it, right, until it locks again. Let's do that where it's a little bit more audio. Okay. Right, and then it locks into place. So in my case, this has still got a little bit of a rearward Cant here. But if I adjust it just slightly forward, because the way my belt sits on my hips right now with my Dunlop retention that I'm currently wearing, a little bit of a 5-degree forward Cant is actually a straight drop for me because the belt kind of leans forward to support my additional gear, we'll call it. Anyway, so this Blade Tech allows some configuration of that Cant to taste. Obviously, in my opinion, this should be a straight drop. You make a holster a straight drop, you allow people to configure it however they want, but this forced sort of 5-degree rearward Cant is trash as far as I'm concerned. All right, so that had to change, and we used the Blade Tech Tek-Mount to make that change real. The second thing that had to change is that, and hopefully this is obvious, that extended magazine release that I use on my P-10 season competition was interacting directly with the Kydex, the inside, part of the Kydex taco holster. And so I'd grab the gun and eject a magazine every time. So I had to Dremel that out. Hopefully you can kind of see it's not I didn't really spend a lot of time in finishing work, but just Dremel that out to make room for the extended mag release. Okay, so those are the two things we changed right off the bat. The next thing I had to change is the retention. For competition, I like really low retention. And the way retention is handled on this holster is, it's friction retention here. So you tighten up these screws, and then instead of just pinching all over, it kind of it does tighten up all over, but the real retention is this sort of recessed or I guess that's the only word I can think of, this slightly more indented portion of the kydex that interacts with the way the TLR7 mounts to the gun. So right here, we've got an indentation that then keeps, like, sort of pinches here and prevents, provided to whatever degree you've tensioned the screws, provides retention on the front and back of the mounting interface of the P-10, rather than what a typical non-light bearing holster will rely on. This, like, usually the front edge of the trigger guard, it'll create a pinch there. And so when you draw, the kydex holster will sort of widen, pop, essentially, around the trigger guard and exit. Well, without that ability, because of the light's presence, they just move that up to here, which is kind of ingenious. I think that's kind of the industry standard, quite honestly, but it works very well. That said, in order to get this thing to end up at the level of retention that was acceptable for me, that I prefer anyway, I had to use longer screws here to back it out far enough that initially I had 0 retention, but I've since kind of come back to just a very little bit of retention, right? It falls out. So that's the third change. First, again, was dealing with the Cant using the Tek-Mount. The second was clearing room for the extended mag release. Third change was elongated screws for the retention mechanism to get it to, what I prefer for a competition retention. Now, the fourth thing, and the thing I'm going to change next, is that in IDPA, we have to carry a cover garment. Part of the rules of the cover garment is that they must cover the entirety and conceal the entirety of your firearm, including the holster, even with your arms straight out like a scarecrow. Now, I don't have any problem with this setup, but since I will never run a P-10F with a TLR7, I want to remove the extra material at the bottom of the holster to buy me another half inch of security on the equipment check, essentially. So next up for me is cutting the kydex basically along the front of the light. I may or may not include the very front, but at least at start, we'll go right here at this angle, cut that flat part off all the way up and round it out on the sight channel. Once that's off, then the holster will only be as long as it needs to be to meet the requirements of the equipment check. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is actually pretty positive as far as I'm concerned. I really like this sight channel. Now, it's not perfect in my opinion, but it's pretty darn good in that it's tall enough to accommodate all manner of, heightened sights, either suppressor height sights or co-witness red dot sights. It's really tall. And for my part, I have a tendency, once I get the draw started, to sort of pivot the gun a little bit. And at no point in this draw is my front sight post interacting with the kydex. On several other holsters, I end up wearing a cut in the kydex where my front sight sort of digs in and just drags kydex. Sometimes I'll draw the firearm and have like a little curl of kydex material on my front sight. So that problem doesn't happen here. So kudos to them on an appropriately wide sight channel. Now, even with that compliment, though, I have to make one other adjustment. The length of pull on this holster before I can break kydex is entirely too long for a competition holster. This mark you see here is where I'm going to cut this holster down and around, either to here or just a little bit lower, maybe to the top of where this extractor bar is, right? Cut it there, and that'll allow me to break, instead of breaking like here, breaking kydex here, break another inch or inch and a half lower. So the draw can, the muzzle can start coming forward about an inch and a half sooner on the draw. You may think that's ridiculous, right? And many of, honestly, it's not going to win me any match, but I just prefer it. So that's how it's going to go. Cut that down. And then we'll take a heat gun and sort of flare it out like this is, because this is a nice touch. It makes it easier to reholster. So they did that pretty well too. It just needs to be lower down on the body of the holster. And that goes for both sides, right? So this cut will come down around here too. Basically you see this angle here. This represents the widest part of the slide essentially. So you want to be able to break that out soon. So it'll come down pretty straight probably, and then roll out. Now, the only limitation here is I don't want to interrupt this retention area, so I'm going north of that, right, as far as higher up on the holster than the retention area, and I won't cut deep enough to expose the trigger guard. So probably where you see this line, which is where the frame meets the slide, I'll probably go at least to this angle here, but somewhere in between this line here and this line here before I cut up and round it out a little bit. Trigger guard needs to remain covered 100%, but other than that, this amount of material here on the sides of the slides, given that the retention device is here, is more than enough to keep the gun stable during a match while I'm running around. So that's pretty much it. Another issue that's kind of endemic to light-bearing holsters, for the most part anyway, certainly non-retention light-bearing holsters, is that in either the pancake or taco format, and I don't think I have a precision holster nearby to show you a pancake version. A pancake is where you take two pieces of Kydex and put it around a gun. A taco holster is where you fold it around a gun, right? Like a taco shell. This is a taco format Kydex holster. One of the issues with the taco holster, typically on a light-bearing one, is that you end up with this section here that protrudes beyond the hardware of the gun to hold the retention screws. On a non-light-bearing holster, those retention screws happen here, and you still get the bottom, you get a relatively straight line from the end of the holster where the retention is with the bottom of the trigger guard. And the benefit of that is if you do a scoop draw, you can index off that holster and just sort of ride it up and then boom, grab the gun, and your finger's already where it needs to be to build that grip. With a light bearing holster, the methodology is a little bit different because you're scooping around and in before you get your finger to where it needs to be. Hopefully you track that. Instead of coming straight up to the gun, you're kind of around and in, right? You can try indexing off these screws with that finger and popping it down, but unless your finger is really short, you end up in this situation here. So that's totally minor. It's a minor concern, but it's one of the reasons I don't like light bearing holsters and typically shy away from them unless I see a real benefit from the extra weight that a light provides, or I have a dark stage that I'm going to be shooting. And in IDPA, you have to have the same configuration throughout the match. So even though you might only have 8 to 10 shots you have to take in a dark house, you have to shoot the whole match with your light holster if you're going to use that weapon mounted light in that stage. So now, in my IDPA draw, I don't typically scoop. I'm usually clearing a garment, coming over the top and grabbing the gun, so it's not that big of a deal. But theoretically, some light bearing holsters, this one's fairly nice in that way, but some light bearing holsters, you're still popping down over the Kydex to build your grip, which is less than ideal. So that said, that's actually kind of okay here. Now, in a perfect world where nothing else matters, you don't have any rules about the forward rotation of the muzzle, like maybe even in USPSA, I don't really know the rules there as much. You could cant this whole thing forward so that you have a straight pull to here, and then you could just index and pull up and go. So, but that requires a forward cant to the holster, which is not something IDPA allows. Okay, so again, this is the Werkz holster, and if they were going to reissue this holster at some point, I would make those recommendations that they make that change, at least for mine. And at that point, it's a custom holster over what they currently provide. If I were to make my own holster that were similar to this, those changes would obviously be addressed. And one other thing I'd like to look at, and I haven't figured it out yet, is how to remove some of the severity of this extra material on light bearing holsters. When you look at something like, this is Safariland 7TS something or other, I don't remember. It's for a Glock with a TLR7, but it works good enough with a P-10C. With these, you can see that because of the nature of the holster, and because it has this retention here with this ALS system, this lever up here that drops a block over the this gap here in the slide to cover the chamber, you're free of the extra hardware here to handle that retention. So you get a pretty straight pull on this with your finger. You can scoop draw these pretty decently, and that extends to some of their other holster formats too. Here's another one, although again this is actually for an X300, but you can see it kind of works for TLR7 as well. You get a pretty quick draw here, which is nice. So I mean, again, a couple things to look at on holsters if you're shooting with a light versus if you're shooting without a light. It's a little bit easier to find some different features in a competition holster without it being light bearing. I guess that covers everything I wanted to cover about the holster. I'm going to make some changes to it. Corey already knows. I'm probably just going to send him some money. Although since I can't buy him this exact holster yet, and I'm going to talk to Werkz about that. I think I might know somebody who knows them at a certain level. There are some competitors. There's the A&R Design. They have more of a tactical use QLS system based light bearing holster. There's also, competition holster builders. I don't know that Precision Holster makes one for it, but I think JM Kydex might. There's also Red Hill Tactical and the like. So there's a lot of options out there, but yeah. Anyway, there's an art that I think that pretty much covers everything about a light bearing holster for a P-10C with a TLR7 that we could talk about. I'll probably touch back up on this topic as soon as I get the modifications of this holster done, and if I foresee additional modifications need to be done, I might just talk to somebody about doing that on my behalf or doing it myself. But oh yeah, one last thing, and it's not super important, is that this holster, one good thing about this holster is that it works like a champ with this is a direct mill SRO, but there's zero contact with that SRO, even with the occlusion, the occlusion device attached to it. It's just a piece of Kydex from Stonebridge. But yeah, works like magic. So, there's a lot of good things to say about the holster in general, but for competition, there's a little bit of extra magic that I need to apply to it to be happy with it. I have used this fairly extensively though. Like I said, I just used this configuration as you see it to luckily, thankfully, walk away from the Nighthawk Custom Firearms Regional Championship with a division win. I shot the other slide, the ported slide, and the different magwell and stuff at the World Championship in September, and I did okay there. I had a couple stages I'm not so proud of, but walked away with a 5th place division finish, 4th master, so I wasn't terrible either. And I continue to compete locally at a pretty high level with this. So the holster's holding up. Otherwise, just a few minor complaints, things to improve, none of which are going to make me win where I wouldn't have otherwise won. But, we're here to tweak gear. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope to see you guys on the range soon. If you see me out, come bug me. And please, by all means, let's if you have anything to say about this or any other video, please include it down in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.